Hey guys, Dustin here, and today I'm going to be showing you something that I think most of us have all had problems with before. It's how to take interior photos that actually look good. These might be because you're trying to sell your home, or maybe you just did some renovations and want to show your friends. But in any case, most people's photos end up looking something like this. The windows are far too bright and the room is way too dark. It just looks really bad and isn't professional looking at all. In today's video, I'm going to instead show you how to make your interior photos turn out more like this. Now, I'm by no means a professional real estate photographer, but I think this is quite an improvement from the first one. You can actually see the buildings outdoors, and the inside of the room is properly exposed as well. So there's actually a bunch of different ways you can do this effect. I'm just going to be showing you two of them here today, one of them in Lightroom and the second one in Photoshop. And to show you how to do this today, we'll actually be using my living room. So we're going to solve this using two high dynamic range techniques, where we essentially take multiple pictures at different exposures and then merge them together into one final photo. I'm going to show you how to do this now, but first of all, let's take the shots. I'll be using a Canon 1DX Mark II for my shots, but really you can do this with any camera that you can adjust the exposure. Interior photography shots look best when you use a wide angle lens. I'm using the Canon 16-35 f4 and generally shoot between 16 to 20 millimeters. As far as positioning the camera goes, you want to try to get it as far into the corner as you can, and I generally set it about waist height because being a bit lower makes the room look even bigger. Next, you want to make sure that your camera is in manual mode so that you've got full control over the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. We want to set ISO to 100 for the best quality shot. Next, we want to set the aperture to the sweet spot of the lens that gives us maximum sharpness. For most lenses, this will be at least f8. In my case, I'm going to use f5.6 today. Set the focus point about 1/3 of the way into the scene. This might vary depending on the lens and camera you're using, but for most cases, this is a good starting point. We want to adjust the shutter speed until the camera's light meter reads a normal exposure. With the first shot behind us, we now want to move on to the second shot, which we're going to expose for the outdoors. To do this, we're going to speed up the shutter speed until the outdoors is exposed properly. You can do this visually by simply watching out the window, or you can watch the histogram and adjust until the right side is no longer being cropped. For the third and final shot, we want to expose for the room itself. Now we're going to slow down the shutter speed until the shadows in the room start showing some detail. Again, this can be done visually by looking at dark areas of the room, such as the sofa, or you can look at the histogram and wait until there's no cropping on the left side. With all three shots now behind us, let's jump into Lightroom and get to work. Alright, so we've got our three photos loaded into Lightroom here. And the one I've got pulled up right now is our normal exposure photo. So you can see here the sky is completely blown out, the inside of the room here is very dark. That's our normal exposure. The next photo here is the one where we stopped the exposure down by about 3 stops. Really to try to expose the outdoors, these buildings in the sky outdoors. And the final photo here is where we stepped up the exposure to really try to bring out a lot of the detail inside the room. So you can see, even if we zoom in on the sofa here, we can actually see the grain of the leather there in the shadows. So what we want to do is we want to actually take all three of these photos and merge them together into one. The first of the techniques I'll show you here today is using Lightroom. What we want to do is first of all select all three photos. So we've got all three of them selected here. We're going to right click and we're going to go to Photo Merge and then HDR Merge. And what that's going to do, it's going to do some processing and essentially combine all three images together into one. We end up with a photo that's drastically better than what we started out with just the normal exposure photo. There's a few settings we can use up top here to fine-tune the result. Auto align, you pretty much always want to leave that on. The second setting here is auto settings. And I usually leave that on as well. It applies Lightroom's normal auto tune settings to the photo. And finally, you've got deghosting options here. If you end up with ghosting issues around the edges, turning that on will attempt to eliminate it. But in this case, I'm just going to leave that turned off. So now we're going to click Merge. So this is the merged photo. We're going to do a bit more fine tuning on. We're just going to go through, we're going to adjust the white balance here. It's maybe a little bit too warm. Bring that down just a tad. I'm going to up the exposure just slightly. And let's bring the contrast up just slightly. Highlights and shadows look okay. I'm going to try bringing the white down just to see if we can get that sky looking a little bit better. There's not going to be a whole lot we can do, but that's a bit better than the way it was. And I think for our purposes now, I'm just going to call that complete. So with really just under a minute's worth of work, we end up with a photo that's much better than what we started with. For the second method, we're going to use Photoshop, and this is my favorite way of doing it, and you end up with a much better result than what you get out of Lightroom. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to File, Automate, Merge to HDR Pro. We'll select all three of our images and we'll click OK. We'll click OK, and what it's going to do is it's going to open up each image as a separate layer within Photoshop. So once it's done that, it actually opens up this Merge to HDR Pro dialog box. So what we want to do to improve this is, first of all, come up here to Mode, and what we want to do is we want to change that from the default 16-bit to 32-bit. And already you can see quite a bit of a difference, but it's still far from the end result. This checkbox here, Complete Toning in Adobe Camera Raw, that's where we're going to actually do most of the adjustments. And there's actually no real other options to choose except ghost removal if necessary. So with this box selected, we're just going to click on Tone in ACR. Okay, so here we are in Camera Raw. And again, nothing really special that we can see right away here, but the real magic happens when you start to use some of these sliders. Instead of a normal 16-bit photo where, for example, we couldn't pull any details out of the highlights or the shadows, watch what happens when we start pulling down the highlights. In a normal 16-bit photo, we wouldn't be able to get any detail at all, but because it's 32-bit, we can actually pull a lot of the detail back out. If we do the same thing with the whites, it'll improve even maybe a little bit more. I'm actually going to pull whites down quite a bit as well. I'm going to increase the exposure a bit overall just to fix up the inside of the room here. Let's play with the shadows slightly, maybe bump those up a little bit. Give it a bit more contrast. And bump the black up slightly as well. And then we can see it looks a little bit hazy outside, so let's turn on some dehazing. You don't want to go overboard with that though, so let's just try 25 to start. And then try the clarity as well, and I think that helps out the outdoors there a little bit more. Let's play with the white balance a little bit. It looks a little too blue, so let's raise the temperature slightly. And 6400 looks all right. And we've got a little bit of a green tint there, it looks like. So let's bump up the magenta slightly. All right, that's looking much better. We're not quite finished yet though, but we're going to click on OK. And what that's going to do, it's going to bring it back into Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a curves adjustment layer. All right, and for this first one, what we're going to do is we want to bring down the highlights just to improve the outdoors even a bit more than what it was. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and invert the layer mask. All right, and let's switch to our brush tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint white on the outdoors here. And what that's going to do is bring down the exposure even a little bit more outdoors there. So we'll do that for this window first. And then we'll go ahead and do these ones here as well. So I want to add one more curves adjustment layer. This time we're going to do the opposite. I want to bump the room up a little bit. And again, we'll invert that. And this time we want to bring up the room. So I'm going to go for a bit larger brush size here. And let's do the same thing. Let's just bring up the exposure in the room. I think that wall looks okay. It's really just the carpet here and the sofa I want to bring up a little bit more. Move the painting a little bit there. For our purposes here today, I'm going to call that complete. Alright guys, that's it for today. I hope you found this video helpful. If you enjoyed it, please help me out and hit the like button below and subscribe to the channel. See you again next time.